The time is now 12:30 p.m. and we'll begin our meeting. This meeting is now open to the public and we have started recording. We'll begin with an introduction to our Spanish interpretation as well as our language justice statement from Tanya Johnson.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Tanya, and I am the interpreter for the Environmental Justice Program at CDPHE. Today, I'm working with my colleague, Valentina, and I'm going to read the Zoom instructions and the language justice statement first in Spanish, and then I'll repeat it in English. Hola, buenas tardes. Me llamo Tanya y soy la intérprete del Programa de Justicia Ambiental del Departamento de Salud Pública y Medio Ambiente de Colorado. Hoy estoy trabajando con mi colega, Valentina. Antes de comenzar, quiero asegurarme de que todas y todos hayan seleccionado el idioma adecuado en Zoom. Si prefieren escuchar la presentación en español, hagan clic en el globito que aparece en la parte inferior de la pantalla de la computadora y seleccionen español bajo interpretación. Si están usando un teléfono celular o una tableta, hagan clic en los 3 puntos que están a la derecha donde dice More o Más y elijan español como su idioma de preferencia. Las y los integrantes de la comunidad están invitados a hacer sus comentarios en español si así lo prefieren. Nuestra organización ha asumido el compromiso de fomentar la justicia lingüística. Invitamos a la comunidad a usar su idioma de preferencia para participar en la reunión. Les agradecemos que hablen lenta y pausadamente y que usen palabras comunes para que sea más fácil de interpretar. Before we get started, I would like to direct everyone to the appropriate language channel on Zoom. If you would prefer to listen in Spanish, please click on the small globe at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language or Spanish, English there. If you are on a tablet or phone, click the 3 dots to the right of your screen that says More and select Spanish there. During the meeting, there may be community members who choose to give their comments in Spanish. If you are not bilingual, you will need to click the English option to hear the interpretation. As an organization, we are committed to language justice. We would like to invite the community members to participate in the meeting using their language of preference. In order to facilitate interpretation, please speak slowly, pause often, and use commonly understood vocabulary. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Having just a tad bit of difficulty starting the interpretation, I believe. So apologies for the delay. Okay, interpretation should now be enabled. Thanks very much, Tanya. I'm going to go over a quick housekeeping items here for today. Please make sure that you have joined the meeting using either your phone or computer audio. Board members are panelists and they can participate by raising their hand, which can be found at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you've joined by phone only, you can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Because this is an opportunity for board members to engage with CAA and department staff, we ask that all board members keep their cameras on. That said, feel free to turn it off if you need to step away and tend to something. Board members, please state your name and your organization each time you speak. Also, if board members can make sure to turn their chat settings to everyone when they're sharing feedback in the chat, that will ensure everyone in the meeting can see it. This meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to the advisory board webpage. I've just linked to that in the chat. You can also find meeting materials for today, including our Zoom guidance document there. Non-board members will have an opportunity to speak during our public comment period. I will turn the chat function on during our scheduled break. Then you can send me your name and your affiliation to join the list of those who'll speak during the public comment time. As a reminder, these are the ground rules that we've put in place in order to have a productive meeting and to ensure that we hear from all the advisory board members. Now I will turn it over to Scott.
Great. Thank you very much, Amanda, for the meeting logistics for today. And thank you, Tanya, for providing the language justice statement. So welcome everyone to Colorado's 24th Producer Responsibility Advisory Board meeting. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Scott Cassell. I am with the Product Stewardship Institute, and I am the facilitator for the advisory board. Now, in today's meeting, we will turn our attention to the requirements around the development of the plan proposal. But first, I will turn the mic over to Darla to welcome the department's newest staff member and also welcome our newest advisory board member. Darla?
All right, great. Thank you, Scott. First, I would like to introduce the department's new communications specialist, Brandon Ingersoll. Brandon is a Colorado native and a recent graduate from the University of Colorado, Denver. He did his graduate work on the ethical use of rhetoric in public discourse, environmental advocacy, and health policy. During that time, he worked as a quality assurance technician for a Denver-based analytics lab focused on ensuring the safety of consumable products. Aside from his academic and professional history, Brandon is an avid runner, hiker, gardener, and baker. He loves being outside, walking his dog, and supporting the wonderful Colorado breweries. Brandon has been with us less than a month, and he's already done so much to support this program. So welcome, Brandon. Would you like to say hello?
Thank you, Darla. And hi, everyone. I'm really looking forward to contributing to the success of this program and watching it develop, and while I get to know each of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. I have to say, even in your first 3 weeks, you have already contributed so much. So we're very pleased to have you on board. Next, I would like to introduce our newest member of the advisory board, Mark Petrovich. Mark was appointed to fill the remainder of the 3-year term for the recyclable materials hauler seat. Mark has over 14 years of experience in the environmental services industry with Republic Services, which has fostered a deep understanding of the intricacies of recycling infrastructure in Colorado. Mark possesses comprehensive knowledge of waste transportation routing methodology, understanding the necessity for productive and efficient routes across the state to bolster the success of the EPR program. He brings comprehensive knowledge of recycling processes, education strategies, legislative engagement, transportation challenges, and the intricacies of waste management in both the urban and rural areas. We are so glad you're here with us, Mark. Would you like to say hello? And if you don't mind, maybe share with us what made you want to join the advisory board?
Yeah, thank you, Darla. Nice to see everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be on the board. So Darla did cover some of my history with Republic Services. And through my experience with Republic, I've picked up quite a bit of expertise in the hauling side and the routing and recycle centers. And a lot of that really aligns with the requirements of the producer responsibility program, the advisory board. And so I believe my participation and in partnership with this really broad base and mix of board members, I think it'll bring a really well-rounded group to the forefront of designing and implementing really a complicated program. So my participation on the board, I think, will bring a collaboration aimed at enhancing Colorado not so stellar waste diversion participation, and we can leverage insights and operational implementation from our hauler perspective. So I'm excited to work with this group of board members with varying professions and experiences, and I'm looking forward to working together to put together a very successful program for Colorado, and equally as important, I think, and Republic thinks, a scalable program. So again, thank you for the opportunity to participate and be here today. Thank you, Darla.
You bet. Thanks, Mark. Scott?
All right. Yes, thank you for that great introduction, Darla, and a warm welcome to Mark and to Brandon. Excellent. All right, so we're going to move on now to a very quick roll call. And this is where I need to see you at the same time as taking the roll call. So I'll move you over to this side. So the nonprofit seat, advisory board chair, Liz Chapman.
I am present. Thank you.
Hi, Liz. Trade Association seat, Scott DeFife.
Scott DeFife, Glass Packaging Institute, present.
Scott. Non-front range local government seat, Advisory Board Vice Chair, Gail Gary.
Good afternoon. I'm here and I also serve on the Steamboat Springs City Council.
Thank you, Gail. Retailers Association seat, Chris House.
Chris House, President of the Colorado Retail Council.
Thank you, Chris. Landfill with recycling seat, Barrett Jensen.
Yeah, good afternoon, all. Barrett Jensen, Waste Connections. I am here and welcome Brandon and welcome Mark.
Hey, thank you, Barrett. Murph seat, Rick Cater.
Rick Cater, Swordfish Consulting, Boulder, Colorado. Here.
Thank you, Rick. Municipality seat, Caroline Mitchell. Okay, I think I heard you. Yes? Okay, gotcha. Thank you, Caroline. County seat, Jake Neese.
Hello, Jake Neese, Erie County Commissioner.
Jake. Environmental Justice seat, Junior Ortega.
Junior Ortega here.
Hey, Junior. Manufacturer of recycled paper products seat, David Seelig. Okay, I hear you, David. Compost facility seat, Clinton Sander.
Yep, here, Clinton Sander, A1 Organics, and also I'll second the welcome Mark and welcome Brandon.
Thank you, Clinton. Packaging supplier seat, Scott Saunders.
Scott Saunders with KW Plastics, I'm present.
Hey, Scott. Non-voting department seat, Wolf Cray.
Everyone, Wolf Cray, CDPHE.
Hey, Wolf. All right, we've got everyone here. Peter Hargreave is here, non-voting PRO seat, and he's the Eclipse Master now. So with that, I'm going to now move us into our business meeting. The first item of business is to approve the summary for the last meeting. That's meeting number 23. So let me first ask if anyone has any feedback. Hearing none, then would someone like to make a motion to approve the meeting 23 summary?
This is Gail Gary, City of Steamboat Springs. I will make a motion to approve the meeting summary or the summary for meeting 23.
I'll
Thank you,
second.
Gail.
Jake Neese, Erie County.
Thank you, Jake. Seconded. Any opposed? Okay, we have unanimous approval. Thank you. Next, I'm going to go over our agenda and then we can dive right into the business. So you hear it, see it up on the screen here. Today's agenda includes department updates, meeting topic schedule, plan approval process. Then we're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to continue the key plan proposal topics after the break. It's possible we might get done a little early. We'll see how it goes. As you know, we're flexible here on that. Then we're going to have public input and then a meeting summary and next steps. So that said, let's jump right into the first agenda topic, which is department updates. And that is over to you, Darla.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. So I'll first give you an update on our rulemaking process. We are amidst our second rulemaking for the program right now. This rulemaking is concerning the primary regs for the producers and the pro. Stakeholder meetings began last December, and we have held 6 stakeholder meetings with over 600 attendees. We've received a tremendous amount of incredibly helpful feedback from our stakeholders, so thank you to everyone who has taken the time to review the proposed rules and submit your very organized feedback to us. We really appreciate it. We've used that feedback to make updates to each draft of the proposed regs, and we published the 3rd draft of proposed rules on March 26th, which we subsequently presented during the 6th stakeholder meeting on April 2nd. We received comments on that 3rd draft through this past Monday, April 8th, and we are currently preparing to file the final draft of the rules this week with the Secretary of State. We will then have our Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission rulemaking hearing on May 21st to present the final draft, and if promulgated, the rules will then be in effect on July 1st, 2024. That is our update for rulemaking. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, seeing none. We'll move on. All right, so the next update we have is to give you a quick preview of the 2024 plan proposal topics that will be coming your way this year. So last month I presented the high-level statutory requirements of the plan proposal to you. So we then worked with Pete to look at the year ahead just to see what the timing, how that would work best for him to present ideas and have consultations with the board on each of the various topics. So what you see here is our best guesstimate of how the information will flow. And of course, the schedule is subject to change as we work through the development of the plan proposal. We may need to move things around a little bit here and there. I'll skip over March and April, since you're already aware of those 2 months, and look ahead to May, where we will turn our attention to the plan, including the topics of increasing targets after 2030 and 2035, producer compliance, reimbursement rate formula factors, the reimbursement rate schedule, and the process to update both of those, recycling practices, and reuse and refill. One fluid topic or topics we'll have each month will be follow-up conversations from prior months. So you can expect that to happen just about every single month. So I won't talk you through those today, but you'll see some suggested topics we anticipate talking through as follow-ups, such as the minimum recyclable list in May. Then in June, we have our in-person meeting, and that's with a focus on the Colorado Closed Loop Glass Tour. And I'll circle back to June in just a moment. In July, Pete will walk us through the funding mechanism and the proposed budget. Then in August, we move into the topics of collaboration with service providers. In September, we talk more about producer dues and offsets for producer dues, eco-modulation, and of course, follow-ups from previous topics. October brings us to the topic of producer collaboration to incentivize design change. It also brings us service costs and schedule of reimbursement rates. Then in November, we move into end markets and the education and outreach plan. And in December, we are slated to discuss the implementation of the education and outreach plan and expanding recycling services and infrastructure. In January, Pete will talk us through the process and timeline to expand recycling services to non-residential covered entities, as well as the contingency plan. We will also have the review of the final plan before the final plan is submitted on or before the statutory deadline of February 1st, 2025. So as you can see, we have a lot to cover in the course of 1 year, in which we only have 10 months left. So that said, circling back to the June meeting, which has a focus on the glass closed loop system in Colorado, in talking with Pete, we feel that it might be imperative for the board to have an additional meeting in June so we can continue to make forward progress with the plan proposal. It has been suggested that perhaps we meet the morning after our in-person meeting and have that meeting be in person at the department offices in Glendale. But if that doesn't work for everyone, we can also look at virtual meeting later in the month. And Liz, I see your hand raised, but I was actually just going to turn the mic over to you for a moment to talk the board through a vote on that. So is that why you raised your hand by chance, or do you have a question?
That is why I raised my hand.
Okay, perfect.
I wanted to start the conversation off by saying that works for me. Easy for me to say. I'm in Colorado. How does that work for the other board members meeting the morning after our in-person meeting in June? And I suppose I should also say, as we launch into this discussion, if there's a board member that thinks that we don't need that extra meeting, by all means, this would also be at the time to express that sentiment.
Madam Chair, it's Scott. So the idea would be do the day that we're planning for the tour on the 12th and then meet on Thursday, the 13th, the morning of the 13th. Okay.
That's what we're discussing at the moment. If there are other ideas, we'd certainly entertain that. The reason that seems to make the most sense is for those board members that are traveling from out of state for the in-person meeting. It seems reasonable to marry that meeting with a trip they're already making rather than a secondary meeting. Also, Thursdays and Fridays are the days, to my knowledge, that the vast majority of board members can attend. I do believe that having the meeting the day before on a Tuesday would be untenable for a number of board members because of other obligations. So that's why we are starting the conversation with Thursday. Go ahead, Barrett. And I apologize, Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado.
Okay. Yeah, so Bear Jensen, Waste Connections. So the way that, what I see on my calendar currently is on June 12th, we have a scheduled meeting from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Is that going to be the entire tour, or are we going to fit a meeting into that timeline as well?
I didn't entirely
ahead,
hear
Donna.
the question, but I think it was if our tour is going to last from 9 to 5. Is that your question?
That is the question is,
Okay.
will we have a regular meeting after the tour?
No, I think the plan is to go to a happy hour to see the fine Colorado bottles in action.
We're just gonna sorry. Go
From
ahead,
glass.
Scott.
If I may, if you really want to complete the circle, you need to pour one out. So
Scott, does that mean that you are amenable, you could make that schedule work by having a follow-up meeting on the 13th?
I can certainly stay over if, yep.
Okay.
We're working on a full day for everybody. That will be very exciting. And yes, if it requires the staying over to Thursday morning to have the business meeting, that's as an out-of-stater, it's fine with me.
And I saw that Clinton, you came off mic briefly. Did you want to chime in?
No, Clinton Sander, A1 Organics. I am good. I was just going to reinforce the empty bottle experience.
You must dispose of the bottle at the end.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
it's completing the loop, full circle. Yep.
I'm seeing a lot of Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. I am seeing a lot of smiles. Junior, please go ahead.
Junior, environmental justice. For me, I would just have to figure out. I would definitely like to stay. Especially if you guys are saying what you're saying. I don't think I can drive 3 hours away. 4 hours away. So I'll just have to figure out lodging and all that and see if I can make that happen.
And Darla, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the board has some discretionary budget to cover things like mileage and lodging expenses.
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And go ahead, Gail.
Thank you, Liz, Gail, Gary, Steamboat Springs City Council. I was just echo that I would support a meeting the following day, and that works for my schedule. So thank you.
And go ahead, David. Thank you.
Recycling, just wanted to add that I'm here. That works for me.
David, we're having a little hard time hearing you. I don't know if it's something on your microphone there.
Is this any better?
Tiny bit.
That works for me because I'm here local in Denver.
Heard you that time. Thank you.
I do, Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado, I do not see any more hands up or board members coming off mic. So I believe we have had a discussion. So if someone would like to make a motion, before you make that motion, Darla, is there a time that you would prefer that this motion for our secondary meeting be made. It strikes me that having it early in the day, the next day, gives board members the most opportunity to make the most of the rest of their day.
I agree, that makes sense. Anytime in the morning would work, but I'd say, you know, between 8, maybe 9.
So would any board member like to make a motion to have a additional meeting on June 13th in the morning?
Gail, Gary, Steamboat Springs City Council, I can certainly make the motion to extend or have an additional meeting in June following our in-person meeting. And do we want to say 8:30?
Sure, 8:30 to 11:30.
Scott Saunders at KW Plastics, I second.
Excellent. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
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 All those opposed, raise your hand and say nay. The ayes have it. I will leave it to our capable CDPHE team to schedule a meeting from 8:30 to 11:30 on Thursday, June 13th. And Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you, Darla, for your work before that. And you've got another meeting and you have some festivities at the end of your tour, which sounds fantastic. So now I'm going to turn it over to Pete to start our discussion regarding the plan proposal process. Pete?
Thanks, Scott. Nice to see everyone. I feel like we're out of sync these days. It's not a weekly type of meeting right now. So nice to see everyone. So the plan today is just to focus our attention today on the areas of the program plan that are further along, given the work that was done on the needs assessment. So there's really 6 main areas that we're going to focus on today. We've sort of set this up so that we'll talk about each item and then we'll have time for questions and feedback. So we're going to deal with producer outreach, which has started already. We'll talk about the comprehensive list of covered materials, the minimum recyclables list, the collection and recycling rates, so the targets for those, post-consumer recycled content, and reuse and refill. Next slide over. So as part of the program, as part of the legislation, there's a requirement in the program plan to describe how CAA will notify affected producers of their obligations. So given the sort of timelines that we're on, this work is already underway. We have a team within CAA that is focused specifically in this area. So they've set up a process already that will help them to identify producers through data acquisition, through looking through state sources, market share data. The focus at the start is really to focus on those largest producers to ensure that they are aware of their obligations. We have, as part of this, our current outreach includes targeted emails that we're sending to those larger companies, market mail outreach. We are hosting onboarding meetings with different producers. We've established a producer working group, which now includes over 400 producers as part of those meetings. We are leveraging relationships with trade associations to ensure that their members are aware. We are also involved in a number of different conferences, SPC being the latest one, and using opportunities through social media to inform companies of their obligations. So we currently right now are aiming to register producers not only in Colorado, but in California and Oregon as well for the date of July 1st, 2024. It's a fairly basic registration that we're looking for from those companies, really just getting contact information, from them. Then we will build onto that from the registration part, then getting into reporting, which will come afterwards. Next slide over. So again, as I said, our current registration deadline, which is the same that is proposed in the draft Colorado regulations, is July 1st, 2024. I know certainly we have heard as part of the feedback that we have been receiving from producers that there is some push to try to move that date slightly back. I know there is a bit of concern in the timeline between when the regulations are passed and when producers need to report. So there is some concern on that side. So I know there has been some push to try to move it back to October the 1st. Currently, right now, as I mentioned, our date is July the 1st. We are trying to make sure that we have producers registered. There will be a lot of work that needs to get done. So we want to make sure that we are getting as many producers in as possible, as early as possible. So a couple of things that allows us to do: the earlier we have them to register, the easier we can then look at where there are potentially free riders and non-compliant producers that may be in the system. It does provide us with more information to establish the fee setting, to ensure that we've got more accurate information. It also allows us as well to make sure that we're getting feedback from all those various different producers, some of which may be dealing in materials that are different than others. So there is a QR code that's on the screen that links people to the registration form on our website. Again, it is quite a simple process right now, and we are using this to make sure that we can get as many producers signed up as possible. There is some advantages in the fact that we are doing several states at the same time. Likely many of these producers are not only supplying into Colorado, but are likely supplying into all three of the states. And so that's really where our driving focus around notifying producers and making sure they're aware of their obligation. Next slide over. I think there's time, Scott, for if there are any questions on this side. I think we certainly are interested in whether there are additional steps that we should be taking as part of this outreach process. If there are any additional thoughts on how we should be doing this. But as I said, we are actively involved in this area right now. There is a large drive happening right now to try to pull in and make sure that we've got as many producers registered as soon as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And so having been at the Sustainable Packaging Coalition conference last week, I can, and being with three of your colleagues, and going through all of this, watching them do some of this outreach here, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done here. And many still don't know very much about these laws. So there's a lot of education and starting with the registration, getting them in the door is really important. So Pete went over a whole range of strategies that they're going through. And when he did, was there anything that came to mind that you think he might not have covered? I don't know if the chambers of commerce here, that was one that came up, getting down to some of the local level or the state level here, that came up in the conference as well. I know that your folks, Olivia Barker, is working on that also. So I just wanted to add that one to your list, Pete. So anyone have any additions or questions for Pete? Okay, seeing none, then I think we can move to the next slide.
Yeah, and I just mentioned briefly before I go on, I mean, this process is, there's been some experience for the team on this side. I mean, the focus is really making sure we bring in the largest companies and making sure that they are on board, because when you look at the numbers of producers that are out there, typically 80% of the overall tonnage is represented by about 20% of the company. So it's trying to make sure that we're making sure to get to those groups, but also again ensuring that for planning purposes that all of the smaller companies potentially that are caught are aware as well. We talked about this already as well last time through, but wanted to talk about the fact on the project management and outreach. So we have developed a structure within CAA around the plan proposal. So we have broken it into chapters. Now, likely, when Darla sent out, I think she sent out the spreadsheet of items that we will be going through. So there are lots of different requirements in the act. We are sort of looking at them and bundling them to some degree to say, how does this make sense in a program plan? What are the items that actually fit together? And then we have a team that we're structuring around those items to make sure each of the requirements are fulfilled within the legislation. So there is significant resource allocation that's being made into the different areas, material collection and management, some of the standard setting and tracking. So this gets into everything from requirements around health and safety, what we would be expecting on that, the types of tracking of materials that we would expect to see, communication and education, which we've had quite a bit of conversation about, and obviously makes up an important part of the actual process. Because compostable packaging fits somewhat differently to the rest of materials, then we'd have a separate chapter that would deal with that. Procurement and reimbursement, which we started to talk about last time, fee setting, which gets into areas like eco-modulation, and then how budget and contingency are going to be set within the program to make sure that the program is stable and properly resourced. And again, if there are issues, that there's contingencies in place. Again, we are using both internal and external resources as part of this project. We will be communicating through this group, as well as through our website and to CDPHA directly on the outreach that will be done to make sure that everyone is informed when that is happening.
Pete, looks like Clinton has a question. I sense it may be on compostable packaging, but we'll hear from
Yes.
him in a second.
Clinton Sander, A1 Organics. Did you jump over compostable packaging?
Did I jump over it?
Yeah, I didn't hear you say it. Did anybody else hear him talk about it?
I did.
Oh my gosh. Maybe I
Yeah.
was in my own little world. I
Sorry,
apologize.
Clinton. I was just saying for compostable packaging, it does fit somewhat differently than the rest of the materials because it really has a different set of rules around or requirements around it. And so, we see dealing with that material specifically within the program plan separately because of those different requirements that are associated with it, the types of investments that are going to be looked at and made as such. So we've separated that chapter out. There are also potentially different ways that we're going to be looking at things like a measurement of contamination and reporting of contamination that would look different than potentially a MRF.
Fantastic. Yeah, I apologize. But yeah, that's fantastic. It needs to have a deep dive look. So I really reinforce that. So thank you.
Absolutely.
No problem. Liz?
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. Thank you so much, Peter. I would like to understand a little bit more about what is on this slide in that it says you're allocating resources to deliver on the key areas. I interpret that to mean that there will be staff that are dedicated to each one of these subcategories. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And then will each of those categories have a page on your website for people to keep up with how progress is going in each one of these areas or provide input?
I would see this all happening through one page, Liz. Like I don't think I would see them separated out. Obviously, the folks that we may target in some of these areas will obviously be different. There will be different, obviously, on the compostable packaging than some of the other materials set. So we'll look at targeting those sessions and updates specifically to those groups.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I think we can move on if you want to finish this slide.
Yeah, I think I'm finished largely, Scott. I would say just to Liz that if there are suggestions like that around communicating, it would be really helpful if it was communicated this way, and that would make it easier to reach the different stakeholders that you represent, that folks on this call represent. It would be helpful to know that because I think we are still relatively early days into the development. So if there are different ways that we can approach it on our website through our communication, happy to take that advice so that we can build it in as we move forward. And I think Carolyn had a question, but she suddenly disappeared from my screen.
Caroline, are you there?
I am Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I took my hand back down because I realized the answer to my question was on the slide. So I guess just to verify, in case others didn't sort of quite absorb, I was asking if this was all going to be internal resources to CAA, and it looks like it's sort of a mixture of internal and outside. So just yeah, okay.
Yeah,
but if there's anything else you want to say about that, because I know we were sort of, part of, there was the big process for the RFP for the needs assessment. So I was just thinking about process wise, is there another big purchasing process coming forward with this one? But it sounds like more piecemeal in this approach.
Yeah, I mean, we are securing external resources as a part of this because we will need expert advice in certain areas. And as CAA gets itself fully up and operational, so internally resourced, there is a step that's happening on that side too.
Chris. You're on mute, Chris.
Okay. 4 years in, I can't figure it out. Peter, good to see you. Thanks for the explanation. My question is about fee setting. So we know this is going to be incredibly important. Just so I have this perfectly straight, we're doing a needs assessment. We'll figure out the needs and then work backwards to figure out what the fees will be on the producers to pay for all the needs. So we're not starting with a fee that we think is reasonable or doable. We're starting with these are the needs, and then somebody's going to have to pay for it. Do I have that roughly right?
No, I think I would more position the needs assessment as a way to understand what the current infrastructure that is in place. So where is the pro starting? What is the system upon which the pro is looking to leverage? So what's currently in place? How does that system work? Where might there be gaps that need to be addressed in order to improve the outcomes of the system? So that provides us with sort of a bird's eye view of what's currently in place. As part of that, we had to build some scenarios, which the Joint Budget Committee will approve a scenario or potentially come up with a new scenario. And then we will have to implement that. But this provides, the needs assessment is important because it really provides an understanding of, we're not coming in blank into trying to establish a system. We know now what's in place. And now it's a question to say, how can we leverage the system that is in place and look to improve that system, fill gaps that are in place, and drive a better outcomes at the end of the day.
So as a quick follow-up, you mentioned the Joint Budget Committee, and they're very busy today trying to wrap up the state budget. They received a presentation from the department some weeks ago and no action was taken. Do we have any knowledge or guess as to when the Joint Budget Committee will take this up again. Of course, they're only meeting for the next 4 weeks and then they adjourn sine die. So.
Well, that sounds like a question for Darla or Wolf, and who may have crystal balls on their desks right now. I don't know
I
how
wish
you
I
wanna
had that
handle
crystal ball and I could speculate, but I can't. So we're at the mercy of waiting to hear back from the JBC. We expect it to be soon, but I can't, make anything up. So hopefully soon.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Now, Pete, let me make another follow-up from here on the fee setting. So you talked about the needs assessment, how that was going to, identify the gaps and the costs for that. And of course, we have to wait to see where the Joint Budget Committee comes out. But how do you explain what you'll be doing on the plan to articulate that further? Is this going to be, where does the formula come in, and where do the producers start to understand how much money it's going to cost them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll be dealing with this separately to some degrees, Scott. But I think the first question is, what is the methodology? How are we going to approach fee setting? And there are different potential approaches we can establish to look at how fees should be set. And then from there, then there's the question of what's the budget? What are the costs in the system? To be able to put that system in place, and then how does the methodology line up with the costs of the program itself?
And would that methodology then be the component of the plan that this group would review?
Correct. And it is a piece that, as we talk about all of these things, will be iterative as we go through. So I think we will certainly be taking this group through pieces of that to understand how might this be approached in other jurisdictions, what are our potential options, and how might we move forward.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions at this point?
I think Scott's got a question.
Oh, did I see off my screen?
Well, I got to change. Sorry, I need Scott. I need to change my background so that my virtual hand is more visible, I guess.
Gotcha. Sorry about that.
That's right. Glass Packaging Institute. Something that you were talking about made me think of a new question. It's really kind of two different parts. One now on the registration of producers. How do you, do you have how do you think it's going? How much fanning of the information loop do we need to do out there to make sure that people who probably should be registering are registering? Are there ways that we can help with that, not necessarily as the advisory board, but in our other roles that interact with the program? And then the second part, as you were going back on fees, and with Scott on other jurisdictions, I'm hoping, and I'm assuming, and I think you spoke to it. I just want to, as you're working on the plan, we may be able to, different sectors may be able to help come up with ideas about how to effectively do things, efficiently, that will also meet the program plan and the state's goals, as we work through it. I'm thinking I'm reviewing the Oregon PRO plan that just came out last week and thinking about what I see on paper isn't how I think it could work, and how we provide some interaction from the material loop parts of the chain here that might be able to help, kind of like we did during the needs assessment data gathering.
Yeah, so a couple of things to unpack on that side, Scott. So I guess first is, I'd caution with looking at the Oregon plan and trying to compare to Colorado. Legislation very different. as to how it operates and what the requirements are. So, to some degree, I would expect differences in how those two plans are put together. Secondly, I think it's important to emphasize this as many times as I can. Situations change, information is improved over time. So the needs assessment provides us with a starting point to understand what the current system is and to understand current approaches. This program plan, as we get into the how are we going to do things, we are going to learn more information as we have discussions with all of you and with broader stakeholders in Colorado. And there is no doubt that we will refine and improve potentially the approaches that are going to be taken as we move forward. So that is the type of thing that we want to understand. You mentioned systems, collection systems, and things like that. There's other areas that we're going to need to lean on organizations like yourselves and other view on this call. So for example, we will talk about recycled content thresholds. Those are areas that we didn't cover in the needs assessment, and that groups like yourself specifically will have, I think, lots of good information for us to share. So we are building upon the needs assessment as part of this work, but it certainly is not. It certainly is not static, if I can put it that way. Finally, I think the question you had specifically about producers and recruitment. I think recruitment is coming along well right now. Until the deadline, I think there'll always be a rush that will come as the deadline gets closer. So people will always push off things to some degree. And I think we know from experience that will always be those outliers. So we'll sign up a number of producers, but there will still be those that will not be signed up as of the date that is set. And therefore, that at that point, we'll need to look at other mechanisms to pull those producers in. The first is obviously, again, communicating and trying to get to those, but there will always be laggards within the system. I will take that back to my team as to sort of what additionally might be helpful from this advisory group to ask the question of them. But I know they are, and they have a plan to escalate their efforts over the next 3 months, I guess, to get us to that timeline.
Thanks. Thank you. Rick, you're up next.
Rick Hader, Swordfish Consulting, Boulder County, Murph guy. It intrigued me, that comment about sourcing registered producers or registering producers. So currently, is there a mechanism for, it would seem unfair that producers that decide to join and register have to be burdened by the cost of those non-registered producers who are producing program materials that are coming into the state. So is that something that you're going to think about? Do you bill them some way, in a roundabout way, or how do you see that playing out?
So I guess the first part, Rick, is this is just simply a registration process right now. So those producers that are registering are not paying a fee at this point.
Right.
We need to land on the methodology, and we need to make sure that we have supplied data from them, how much materials they're supplying in and what types of materials they're supplying in order to assess their costs. The issue with free riding producers is a common issue across EPR programs. There are different ways to potentially deal with that. Some jurisdictions will have administrative penalties that they will charge against producers. There is the potential to look at within the structure, when their rates are charged, that it would be for the entire time that they have been supplying materials into the marketplace. Potentially, there could be interest rates that are attached to those to make sure that they are not provided with an incentive to not sign up and not be part of the program. But I think right now, I mean, our focus is on, we need to make sure that people understand their obligations. I think Scott's comments are quite well put, that, you know, producers are new to this completely in the United States, and we need to be out there and making sure that we're saying this to them at least 7 times to make sure that they understand what their obligations are and what they need to do moving forward. And so that's sort of what we need to make sure that we're out doing and ensuring that producers are informed.
Yeah, maybe advertising and shaming them as non-registered parties in Colorado might help, right? Thanks a lot.
Yeah. This is, to be sure, all the producers that are paying into the system don't want to pay for other people. So that they have a big interest in making sure that they do pay. And we're not at that point yet, as Pete's saying. It's the registration first, and then the state has an interest as well. And there's a lot of interests moving in that direction. But it's a good point to bring up at this juncture. Caroline, and then I'm going to suggest that we start moving on to some other slides because we do have quite a few things to go through here. Caroline?
And I'm sorry, I didn't see this. Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I didn't see the time on the agenda for the update. So it's a little bit off the current topic, but Wolf, in the topic of the JBC vote, I believe when there was the presentation in March, they said that they were going to submit written questions if they had any. I'm just curious, process-wise, did they submit any questions and have those gotten back to them? Just kind of get some rough sense of where we might be in the process, knowing we don't have a crystal ball.
Sure. A little outside of our agenda area, but I'll just quickly touch on that. Yes, right after the JBC hearing, they submitted, I believe it was like 22 or so different questions to us. We responded to those questions and got our responses back to them the following week, the same week where they were reviewed the following week. So yes, that's all been addressed.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Pete, back to you, and maybe go to the next slide.
Sure.
We're up to that.
And
there you are. Thank you.
I'll just mention one more thing just really quickly on producers. There is one additional thing that I should add about notification is certainly once the rules are approved, that will help as well, because I think there still are some areas that are questions for some of the producers out there around whether they are obligated or not. And I think the approval of those rules will help on that side. So the next area we wanted to talk about was there is a requirement in the regulation to include a comprehensive list of covered materials included in the program. We are proposing at this point to use the list of materials that were evaluated as part of the needs assessment. We've spoken about those a number of times. Hopefully nobody rolls their eyes at me at this point. There were 7 categories: paper, rigid plastic, flexible plastic, glass, metals, compostable, other compostable or certified compostable, and then other materials category, which gets into things like wood and ceramics. The material categories would be based on the majority of the package's weight. So I think we've had questions in the past where it's like, where would a box of wine fit? And again, it would fit under the category where you know, the weight, the majority of the weight of that package would fit. So this list, I want to be clear, 100% clear on, this is not a communications list. It's not for the purposes of the public. This is for purposes of ensuring that producers understand the types of materials that are covered under the product, under the program, and that's the purpose of the list. Next slide over. So I won't try to go through all of these categories again, but the idea would be we would capture, we would include as part of the program this list of a comprehensive list of materials. So this is paper. It's broken in, obviously, there's lots of different types of paper packaging and products that potentially are captured. Everything from gable top to printed paper to craft packaging, cups, lots of different products that are included. So we've tried to provide more of a larger list of materials to make sure that it's clear that all of these types of packaging would be covered under covered materials. So this is the list for paper. The next slide over deals with rigid plastics. And again, we have tried to separate out these categories by materials that, again, may have different flows through a MRF. They may have more problematic or less problematic aspects to them as to their ability to be sorted, the end markets they potentially go to, and the value of those end markets. So again, 18 different categories for different types of rigid plastics. The next slide over then deals with flexible plastics. So that would include everything from different types of film to woven film to potentially tea bags and things like that that might be made from plastics, and then smaller plastics as well. Next slide over. These are the metal categories. We've tried to capture, again, your typical steel, aluminum type of containers, aerosol containers that might be captured. Next slide over. Glass we just kept as one category, both clear and colored glass. There was some discussion early on about including things like ceramics in this category, but we did move it eventually to other materials. Next slide. We have a category for compostables because obviously they fit differently under the program. So we have rigid flexibles, flexible plastic compostables, and paper compostables. And all of these would need to be certified. If they are not certified, they would fall under either the paper or the plastic, rigid or flexible plastic categories. Next slide over.
Question from Clinton and Mark.
Yep.
Clinton?
Go back a slide if they're both on certified compostable.
Yeah.
Yep. The Clinton Standard A1 Organics. Yeah. So Pete, I was wondering about within this category, are you going to expand into rigid plastics, flexible plastics, paper, like with subcategories to better understand what are we talking about when it comes to certified compostables? And then also the second question is certified compostable going to have a definition that will explain what are we actually talking about here when we say certified compostables? I got a couple other questions, but I'll start there.
Yeah, so I think I think that we would stick with the definition that Colorado was also using in its other legislation. So I think they referred to.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yes, the truth in labeling law.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I think we would stick with the same definitions that they have in place. I guess there's a question internally if we have separate subcategories. There may be separate subcategories we want to have for different reasons for fee setting methodology or otherwise, Clinton. But at this point, I think this is what we would propose to have in the program plan, and we may look at separate categories for reporting and fee setting structures.
Okay. I guess my question then, a follow-up question to that would be if the definition under certified compostables will eliminate, because like also written in, the act, they're talking about products supplied or purchased, food, beverage consumption that are originally disposed of after a single-use term of use. So what I'm thinking through is, do we have to have two categories of certified compostables that are one, you specifically for food waste diversion tools necessary because they've touched food, they're helping support the diversion process? And do we have to then have an idea or a category for single-use replacement compostables? Because right now that's the two kind of categories you have out there. But if we're able to keep them within the EPR to food diversion tools, then that kind of would negate that other side. But as a compost manufacturer and operator, we're going to see them all.
Yep.
It's just how it happens. And so I'm just trying to think through that process, because I know collection is not a part of the EPR. It's more of just processing and contamination reduction. So it's a little hard to figure that out when it comes on to this part of the list. Maybe it's another time for that.
Yeah, so I don't have an answer for you, Clinton.
Yeah.
On that side, I think I understand the rationale for why you may be asking for it. I'm not sure if it totally serves a purpose or not. So I need to think about that. Yeah, let me write that down. And again, if you've got additional thoughts on that, that would be helpful to hear back on.
Yeah, I'll start typing.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, and then state your name and affiliation, please.
Yeah, Mark Petrovich, Republic Services. And Peter, this is just a clarifying question. I'm coming in a little late to the dance, but with the materials that suppliers will be required to pay into is obviously, as far as Republic is concerned, and I'm speaking for Republic's recycle centers, there's a lot of material on there that we are unable to process at the time. So I just wanted to clarify my understanding of that there are people that are going to pay into it, and knowing that there are several items on the list that are not recyclable currently.
Correct. So this list is not about what materials would be collected and recycled as part of either the minimum recyclables list or the additional materials list. All producers are required that are captured under covered materials that are supplying to covered entities would need to report in. So we need to know what that bulk of material is. We then need to look at what potentially can be collected currently in the system. And so we'll get to the minimum recyclables list, which will be those products that we'll be collecting across the state. And then there may be some that we're only collecting in certain areas. But for those materials that aren't collected at all, they will potentially, or I guess they will have an additional potential cost associated because we have to eco-modulate for those. And we also need to think through, how are we going to bring those materials into the system? How are we going to eventually look to recycle those materials moving forward? And so that will be something that the pro needs to think through. But again, not all of these products obviously will be recycled. We're well aware that there are many products that potentially are on this list that are problematic to service providers, mainly either because they're problematic to sort or they cause issues in your facility, or there simply is very poor end markets for those materials.
Okay. That's good. Thank you, Peter.
No problem.
All right, Pete, you got one more slide, and then we got a quick question slide so people can have another chance.
Yeah, so getting to those products that I think Mark was talking to that may not be recycled. I'm sure there are a few on this list that Republic or others may not be managing. So we wanted to make sure we were capturing other types of covered material as well. So typically when we think about packaging, we think about glass, metal, plastic, paper. But obviously there are other unique materials that are used for packaging that include things like ceramics, wood, rubber, textiles. And then there are some packaging that are fit under maybe a metal container, but are not things that you would be collecting through a curbside program, partially because of the materials that are contained within that may pose health and safety or other types of concerns. So this other material category is meant to cover those other materials. None of these materials likely make up a large part of the overall stream, but they are covered materials that are caught currently under the program. And I think we move then into some questions on this. And I apologize that we're going through this list again with you, but again, things change over time, and some may think I may not have given a fair shake to things. So we certainly want to make sure we hear back from all of you and make adjustments as we move forward.
Okay, so are there any covered materials that are missing that you think should be there, and what changes should be considered and why? And I do think that many of your questions fit into, this slide here. So we may have covered most or all of it, but just another chance here. And then we're going to be going into the minimum recyclable list next.
So again, I don't think we need answers necessarily today. Certainly, we're still early in the process, but we can certainly look to that afterwards. And Clinton, I think Rebecca has asked the comments about the definition of compostables, which thank you, Rebecca. That was a miss on my side. So, yeah.
No worries, Pete. I just popped in the chat for everyone to.
Great. So Clinton, you have a question.
Well, I was going to ask just on Clinton Sander, A1 Organics, time frame on some of these questions if we want to get more material or more information back to you, Pete. What's your time frame?
We're aiming to deliver in February. So listen, Clinton,
we got time. Okay. I just wasn't sure if there was, yeah.
Yeah, realistically, as we look forward, we're going to want to start, trying to move towards, landing documents far before February. We're going to probably want to land documents before we start moving into the holiday season in December. So we want to receive comments back so we can adjust things, sooner in the process. So, I don't think there's a specific date that we're looking at necessarily, but if after this session we can look to make sure we have feedback before the next meeting and we can start to make changes, I think that would certainly be helpful for us.
Okay. Yeah. And again, Clinton Sander, A1 Organics. I just can't stress enough the complication, or not how complicated certified compostables are right now. And there's a lot of national attention on it and a lot of people working on it. And so it's like, I'm a little concerned that maybe Colorado EPR is a little bit like the cart before the horse. And we're going to gain some knowledge here in the next year based on a lot of national groups getting together and really starting to talk through the supply chain, through the manufacturing side of it, through the testing side of it, through the use side of it. That would be really helpful and beneficial to making sure that we design a really great system here in Colorado to support this packaging. So I just, a lot of happening at the same time. So I just really want to hope we can utilize those resources as it's happening, because it's all happening together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So
go ahead, Pete.
I was just going to say, I totally understand that perspective. I certainly know this is an evolving space and there's lots happening on it. We do have a number of folks on the team that are quite well connected to some of the developments on this side. And I would say to you, I mean, this is something that we want to make sure that we build in. This space is dynamic. There's changes that are going to be happening all the time. We're going to see them in compostables. We're going to see them in other packaging materials as well as time moves forward. We're going to see it in MRF infrastructure and changes that are going to happen. So we need to make sure that we build this plan to be somewhat dynamic. We don't want it necessarily to just be stuck in what decisions were made in April of 2024. We want to make sure that we can deliver a plan that can make sure we take into account the changes that might happen in the marketplace or the learnings that we have from the testing of these materials to how they're best processed, to all of those types of things that I think need to get figured out for compostables.
Clinton, this is the biggest, one of the biggest areas for all 4 states that are working through, if there's one area that I've seen. Why don't we perhaps talk offline here and figure a way to bring some of the, you know, the context and knowledge in. We do have some, you know, other opportunities for this group to pull off to the side or bring in other experts and working with CAA. So let's think through that a little bit more in the confines of the, you know, public meeting laws and other things that we have to abide by. But I think that you're bringing up, you know, some good points about how to feed things in from various other groups working on this, because many of the things that Colorado's going through here, while some or many would be unique to Colorado, there's a lot of other things, as you know, that are very much the same conversations happening all over the country. And and you're involved, I'm sure, in most or all of those. So let's have a conversation outside the call here so that we understand a little bit more and how we might be able to feed some of that into this process.
Thank you. Sounds great.
Okay, Pete, go ahead.
Okay, just moving into the minimum recyclables list. I know we've had lots of discussions on this. There is a requirement in the legislation that requires that the program plan include a minimum recyclables list. Again, which is a list of materials that must be collected in a manner that is as convenient as the collection of solid waste. So we've had lots of discussions as part of the needs assessment around a proposed minimum recyclables list. So I think we're thinking that this makes sense as a starting point for our discussions. There still is, I know, some concerns potentially around the materials that are on that list, and I think that's what we want to drive more into to make sure that we've landed on the appropriate list for the program plan. So if we just turn over one more slide, Amanda, then we move into the list that was included as part of the needs assessment. And I apologize. Hopefully it's big enough for everybody to see. I was trying to provide it in a one slide. So we followed the same order for this list around those categories. So paper, rigid plastic, flexible plastic, metal, and other. You will notice that there are no current flexible plastics that are included in this minimum recyclables list. So we have just included some rigid plastics that are included in this specific list. So there have been, I think, in the past, a few questions that have been raised around areas like thermoforms specifically. So there is time to revisit what we have on this list, and to make sure that we have the appropriate list of materials that should be collected statewide, aligned with collection of garbage. Next slide over. So we can look at this question. I mean, and maybe it's better to go back to that list, Scott, for when we have the discussion part. But I think, you know, we've gone through this list quite a few times. Should any of those materials be reevaluated for inclusion, or any of the materials be, I guess, reevaluated for exclusion, or potentially materials that are not on this list that you think should be included? You know, and then a bit of a question as to why. So maybe if we can scroll back to the last slide, just so people can see the list again. You know, are there any materials? Is there anything new? Is there additional information you would say that, you know, our assessment wasn't good enough, or there needs to be a revisit of this for these reasons?
Rick and then Scott.
Yeah, so Rick Cater, Murph's guy, Boulder County, Swordfish Consulting. I'm pretty cool with what we've got here. Most of the plants are currently taking this stuff and working it. Obviously, the thermoform is problematic for some operators, but I would say most are blending that in with their bottle stock. And as long as, and in your evaluation, you were looking at percentages of blend and whatnot as a possible issue. So I'm good with this. I think the paper cups, I would probably add to the readily recyclable list just because Denver is currently accepting them, has found markets for them, and it seems to be going well. So those are the guys, the cups and the thermoform. I think thermoform should stay, cups should come on. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it.
Scott?
Scott the Five Glass Packaging Institute. I'm not even sure I want to ask the question, but I thought newsprint was exempt. Newspaper was exempt.
No, newsprint is not exempt. There is a requirement in the program plan for the pro to work with companies that are providing newsprint or publications that are providing, and Rebecca can correct me as I say this, but news related current events related materials to work with the pro to provide in kind potentially funding. Rebecca, did I get it somewhat right?
Yep, that's totally correct, Pete. Just newsprint that's related to news and current events is exempt.
So Scott, you will have some newsprint that is unrelated to that. You'll have flyers and things like that that would not be considered a news related. So you'll have other types of newsprint that would be completely caught, and then there's the news current events related materials that the pro as part of the plan will need to work on an agreement with those producers.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Oops,
I think
sorry.
I get it.
Okay.
No, I'm good. I get it.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Caroline?
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I guess I'm the thermoforms person, one of the thermoforms people on our conversation. And I'm hearing Rick Cater say that, in his experience, folks are mixing it in with the bottle plastic. I don't feel like I am the person who has the depth of knowledge to say whether I think thermoform should be in or out, but I guess it would be helpful for me to maybe understand sort of a deeper level of the market's sort of assumptions that CAA and the folks who created the needs assessment are assuming in this. Are we assuming they're getting mixed in as an acceptable contaminant in with the bottles? And if so, will increasing the volumes be sustainable for that? Are we anticipating that they're going to a separate carpets market or some other market? And if so, are the MRFs going to be resourced for creating that separate bin? So I guess just better understanding so that we can all have a better sense of the plan for thermoforms, and maybe have a broader perspective on whether they would make sense to be in or out with that additional information.
Okay, so I think I'm not going to be able to provide you, Carolyn, with a full response today, but I think we can certainly pull some of that information that we've got. And I think certainly we are looking for feedback as we move forward on this side. So there is certainly some questions of flows when it comes to PET and then additional thermoforms that we'll be looking for from service providers. And Mark, I think you may have something to add to that, so I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, Mark Petrovich, Republic Services. Thank you, Peter. I just wanted to a couple items to note. The 2.3 clear PET thermoform containers, Republic, that was something that is something we cannot accept. And now I'm speaking just for Republic's material recovery facilities. And then also 4.1 steel aerosol containers and 4.3 aluminum aerosol containers. Both we currently don't accept. And really the reason behind that is we have had those aerosol containers just recently puncture and actually start a fire on our conveyor belt in one of our MRFs. And so I just want to state currently Republic does not accept those items that are on this MRL list. Thank you.
If I might add just a quick follow-up question to that, Mark, if I can. So we often get quite a bit of diversity of comments back around aerosols. We hear from some service providers that they can take them every day and they have no problems and there's never been a problem. And then we hear significant concerns on them. So just understanding, have you been accepting them for some time and this is a change to the facilities, or can you just provide a bit more background on that?
Sure. Mark Petrovich, Republic Services. Peter, I'm not 100% sure on that. And the reason being is because the recycle centers that we currently own and operate now were through an acquisition of GFL that happened less than a year ago. So that happened in June of 2022. But I do know, so I can't speak to the history of those recycle processing centers prior to Republic owning them, but currently they do pose a problem, and I'm sure they do make it into the stream, but it's not something that we want to list as acceptable as far as Republic is concerned.
Appreciate that. It would be helpful, I think, to understand sort of why the differences within the sector. I don't know if that's something that can be taken back between some of the organizations, or if that's something that, might be helpful information for us to understand why some service providers, some MRFs are okay to manage them and others aren't. Is it a technology question? What is it exactly that creates some difference between the organizations, and how might that be overcome?
Yeah, Mark Petrovich, Republic Services. Peter, I will dig into that, and I will get a little more clarity on the history of it. And then I'll pose that same question: how some recycle centers do accept and some do not. And so I will dig into that and get some clarity on that.
Okay, but very helpful feedback. Thank you.
Great. And Pete, since we worked on that 23 years ago, aerosol containers. So I will talk to you about that as well. It's usually flattened and punctured for many of these so that they know that there's nothing in them. I think that's part of the problem. But so David, next.
David Seelig, Federal Recycling. I just wanted to back up to Caroline's question regarding the thermoforms. In my experience, loads that we're currently shipping, we've had absolutely no problem finding homes for thermoforms, and a lot of places will accept them blended into loads of PET bottles, as well as separate in mixed trailers. So I think those should definitely stay. I think there are plenty of markets, and I think that there could even potentially be some in-state end markets coming in that regard for those as well. So I think those should probably be pretty solidly on there.
Right. Okay. If there's no more questions right now, I think what we're going to do is take our break now. We have a 5-minute break. At this point, we don't have too much more coming, but I don't want to push it. And so let's take 5 minutes at this point and come back. And Amanda, I guess you're going to be starting the clock. Go ahead.
Yeah, members of the public, the chat is now open. If you would like to sign up to speak during the public comment period, please send a chat to hosts and panelists with your full name and your affiliation. The chat function will remain open until public comment begins. Please note that the public comment period is not a time to ask questions, but rather to provide feedback. If you do have questions, please email them to eprcomments@state.co.us, which I've just put here in the chat. Board members, please be mindful of the time and return promptly. We will see everyone back here in 5 minutes.
Okay, welcome back. Everyone, I love that music. Should have had the eclipse happening at the same time, but we're going to now continue our discussion on the key topics in the program plan development. And just to give you a little idea here, we're on slide 31. We have about 8 or 9 more slides with some opportunity for questions. And then we're going to take the public comment and then we'll wrap up. So Pete, let me hand it over to you, please.
Yeah, no problem. And I apologize that I may be taking longer than I should.
No, I think you got a lot of great questions here. It's wonderful. Yep.
And sorry, David, did you have another question or is your hand up from before? Oh, perfect. Okay. So the next part of the legislation requires the program plan to set targets for minimum collection rates, minimum recycling rates, and minimum post-consumer recycled content rates for the certain types of materials, covered materials, so paper, products, glass, metal, plastic, that the state will strive to meet by January 1st, 2030 and January 1st, 2035. Just next slide over. I just want to remind you sort of how, so the collection and the recycling rates are both set in the legislation. With all of my graphic design ability, I've tried to just show this on the slide here around how each of those are measured. So collection is the weight of covered materials collected under the year in a calendar year over the weight of covered materials used for products sold or distributed by producers within or into the state in the same calendar year. So you've got a similar type of process for collection rate and recycling rate that are measured. The recycling rate is really what is marketed for recycling. That is the way that requirement works. But just to give you an idea as to how those rates are set. Next slide over. We are looking at a starting point, at least in the discussion, is to say, do we establish those collection and recycling rates for 2030, and then on the next slide over, eventually 2035, based on the average rate for the selected scenario. So the selected scenario, or at least proposed right now, is the medium scenario. And you can see the collection and recycling rates. We would take the average of the ranges that are there and use that as the collection and processing rates for 2030 and then moving into 2035. Just a note that, I mean, the 2035 rates are probably less important, if I can put it that way, in the sense that we will have the need to potentially review and update the program plan in that time period after 5 years. So the later date, hopefully I don't get myself in trouble for saying this, but it's probably less important to some degree because there will be a review of that process. But certainly that 2030 target would be, I think, probably more of a focus. So I think we have questions already. So Scott, I don't know if you want to start. Oh, Scott, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Scott to 5 Glass Packaging Institute. This is for covered material. The non-covered material is not in the denominator. Therefore, we're only talking about the material that's in the plan, right? Or are we talking about a statewide rate?
Correct. Just covered material. So if we go back 2 slides, Amanda, to the equations that are up there. Yeah, so it's the weight of covered material used for products sold or distributed by producers within or into the state in the same calendar year. So it's only covered materials that are supplied to covered entities that would be included in that rate. So that supplied number would be based on that.
Okay, Amanda, we had some questions on slide 35, so maybe we can just rest it on there for a little bit since Pete went through all of the slides. So should the collection and recycling rates be based on the modeling done as part of the needs assessment is one question. And then if not, what might be a better approach? So in addition to the questions that you have, think through if these questions are appropriate for you. And with that, Caroline, you're up next.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I'm guessing we went through this before, Peter, but just to make sure my brain is oriented, where we're thinking the difference between the collection rate and the recycling rate, is that contamination? Is that sort of processing inefficiencies? Can you remind us what's the gap between the collection rate and the recycled rate?
Yeah, it would be the difference of what happens at the sorting facility. So the efficiency of that facility to sort the materials and market them.
Thanks.
So I will note a couple of things. There is no targets, obviously, for other materials. That's one of the other sort of material categories that we have there. So I guess there may be some question around that. But we've established them for the other 4 sets of material.
Liz?
Sorry.
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. Thank you. One of my questions is, it says, should the collection and recycling rates be based on the modeling? But there's not a suggestion about how else it would be based. And my understanding is that the costs associated with collection, sortation, and getting things recycled are all quite variable in terms of what does fuel cost, what is the market rate for those various materials. And it seems that those are the sort of things that should be fed into a model. And I'm not sure if that's how the needs assessment model was created. So I guess before I could make a suggestion about what would be better, I think it would be good to understand what were the inputs that led to the model in the needs assessment.
Sorry, Liz, I may need you to just explain a bit more as to what you're looking for. So the inputs into the needs assessment were based on the scenarios that were built, right? So the inputs would be, different, if I can call them interventions, additional promotion and education, providing additional collection opportunities, accessibility opportunities, sorting technologies, investments in infrastructure, that would be taken by the pro to get to those rates. So those were the inputs that went into the model to make that decision. Is that, and I just want to make sure I understand the question properly.
Yes, and I see that Wolf, Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. I see that Wolf also raised his hand, so I wonder if he has something to add to what you just said.
Wolf Cray, more of just a clarifying question, I guess, because looking at the question we have up here, I just want to make sure that we're talking specifically the collection and recycling rates that are material specific.
Correct.
Great. And I think that's an important term, right? Because the recycling rates that were established in the needs assessment are very much determined and already setting the course for the goals of the program, whereas the material specific rates are different from that.
Sorry, just so I understand, Wolf, if we go back a slide, they are material specific rates that are set within the program plan or within the needs assessment. We had separate categories for paper, cardboard, glass, metal, rigid plastics, and flexible plastics.
Right. But to the question that's being raised, that question does not apply to the statewide recycling rate goals because that's already been developed and more or less enacted, whereas material specific questions are different from that.
Yeah, and I guess we're just simply looking at it as part of the program plan. We've got to set recycling and collection rates for the program plan. And so I think we looked at it to say the starting point makes sense to say we've done modeling on this around what could be achieved by the types of interventions that were proposed as part of the various scenarios. And so I think what we're recommending or bringing forward today is really, is this the right place to start the conversation, or is there another approach that potentially we should consider?
Right. I'm just making sure we're clear that we're talking material specific,
Correct.
not total recycling rates. Yeah,
Correct.
that's all.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Wolf. Are there other questions, whether clarification or an answer to the questions that are up on the screen now?
And hopefully, Liz, I didn't horribly bungle your question. So I please correct me. I'm sometimes a little slow, so I apologize. Carolyn.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I guess I'm sort of struggling with feeling like I'm in a place to answer this question. And I guess I'm wondering, you know, with this being brought up this way, I don't know if there is any additional context that you can give us. I mean, I know Liz was sort of talking about understanding the backgrounds to the model, and I'm assuming sort of those backgrounds are all the things we talked through last fall and winter in the development of the needs assessment. But I guess maybe I'm trying to understand maybe what's sort of driving this question of, have you gotten feedback from folks that there should be a different approach, or can you just sort of maybe give more context for where this question is coming from that might help us provide some perspective into it?
So as part of, so we have a needs assessment that we've written just recently and we put out. We now have to move to a program plan. Now there's things that we've done in the needs assessment that we could simply take and say, yes, we should just simply extend this into the program plan. It makes sense. You've done the modeling already. These rates make sense to set as the average. But the way that the legislation's set up is it's not whatever was in the needs assessment now is needs to be followed through. We need to consult on each of these elements again to test to make sure are there, you know, after all of the work that's been done, are there changes? Are there things that have happened since then that potentially we would look at and say, this is reasonable, this is not reasonable, and therefore we should be looking at making adjustments to what those modeled results were, and what the target should look like moving forward. Is that helpful, Carolyn?
That is incredibly helpful. So still, Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. So I guess I'm reading this as being a sort of a double check as required by the way the legislation is set up. Not that there's some identified like, whoa. So yes, I appreciate that context. Thank you, Peter.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. Liz?
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. I do not think that you bungled anything, Peter. I think I may have not asked very clearly. Thank you for your response. I suppose part of what I'm curious about is there's a lot, as I understand the system, there's a lot that can be done to improve the collection rate. And there's quite a bit that can be done with technological upgrades and contamination reduction efforts and sortation improvement at the sortation stage. But the actual recycling rate is often market determined, depending on what the price of things is going for, who's accepting material, who can process material. And so as I understand how you define the difference between the collection rate and the recycling rate is how much of the material is actually sent to be processed into new packaging or into new products. And I am struggling a little bit with Colorado being in absolute control of that rate because there are things beyond what one state can dictate. Or am I misunderstanding what is meant here by recycling rate?
So I guess I would put it to you that the recycle rate is completely driven to some extent by what is your collection rate, because you're collecting the material. Now you've got to sort it. So the pro is going to look at working with MRFs to make sure, how do we process things more efficiently? How do we make sure there is less potential process loss through that system? And obviously there's going to be upfront things that are going to be done as well to look at how do we make sure there's less contamination added to the bins. And we're going to try to make sure that there is a more functioning system on that. We will be looking at end market, trying to look at end markets. And I think, certainly take the count that end markets are often international, and they have movements up and down. As producers, the pro needs to figure out how do we make sure that we have markets for all of these materials. The price may certainly fluctuate, and we need to take that into account as we move forward. But I think we look at it as we need to collect a certain amount of material, make sure that we're collecting as much material as possible, and then making those investments upfront or on the collection side or on the MRF side to make sure that we're processing those materials through. I think that to some degree, the pro has control to some degree over making sure that those end markets are in place and that we're finding homes for that material to be reutilized into packaging or other products.
We have two more questions here, Scott and then Rick.
Oh, I was going to let Rick go first if you.
Rick, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah,
you can do that.
Yes, Rick Cater, Swordfish Recycling, Consulting, MRF dude. So I look at the slide you showed before as a yield slide. That's what we expect to yield by commodity. And you're showing a current state against future state. And that's current state is 51% of paper in the low. And your future state is going to be 57% of the available paper that's out there in the waste stream. You're expecting to go to about 57% yield. Am I reading that matrix correctly?
No, these aren't yield rates. So if we go back two more slides and we go look at the definitions. So the recycling rate is based on the weight of covered materials that are recycled under the program in a calendar year over the amount of weight of covered material used for products sold or distributed by producers within or into the state in the same year. So you're looking at, let's say you supply 100 tons of rigid plastics into the marketplace and your target is 70%. So you would need to collect obviously more than 70 tons of material to make sure that as it goes through the process that you're marketing that 70 tons and recycling it obviously into new products or packaging.
Okay, all right. And whether or not it's a negative market or a positive market is meaningless at this point. We sell glass at a negative in many cases. So the valuation of the product is not necessarily the game. It's whether or not you can get it to an end market. So I agree with Liz on that one.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Scott, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Scott, to Five Glass Packaging Institute. I think one of the other things that at least I'm, not that I'm struggling because I understand the numbers, you know, about whether they are the appropriate numbers or not, is also related to how it's used. I mean, is it aspirational? Is it holding the PRO to its own performance metrics and things of that nature? Are there fines and fees? I can't remember in the law necessarily what happens if the PRO doesn't meet them, but I think it's more about the performance of the system after this expense has been made to build the system, to make sure that it's performing the way it's supposed to be. Or potentially, if the collection's very high, but in the out years, the recycling rate is low, there's going to be a reason for that. Either there's not a market or for some other reason. And that may inform changes to the program plan in the next 5-year tranche or something like that. But I want to make sure I understand kind of like the goal, the use of the rates, because they are required, but I can't remember exactly what they're required for.
So I'll maybe leave the legal side for Rebecca if she's still on. But you know, the targets are meant to push the activities of the pro to make sure that they are meeting the desired outcomes that the legislators have set, that CDPHE and Colorado state legislators have set. So it's meant to push those. Those targets aren't met, then you know there's questions about what additional efforts might need to be taken by the pro to reach those targets. Now, targets, I will say, are somewhat difficult when a program started, because there's lots of potential, not unknowns, but there are factors potentially that are we have to some degree less information on. As we start getting better information back from producers around supply data, around the actual function of the system, as we actually have tracking and reporting in place, we improve over time as to how to set those targets. So it is something that builds over time, and maybe I will stop there because I see Rebecca's on her camera, and hand it over to her from a legal perspective as to the requirements of the targets.
Yeah, so the requirements of the targets are enforceable. The department would be the one that would be enforcing it, and the department can enforce essentially any requirements under the act. You know, I think we would probably use the existing mechanisms in the program for reevaluating and that sort of thing before we turn to enforcement, but you know, it is an option. So.
Sorry, Scott, does that answer your question?
It does. I was kind of asking for the benefit of for the record, so that because I thought that was an important, you know, thing to put out there in the public record so that people understood why we're talking about these rates.
Okay, so noted. All right, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Becca. So going into, I'm not seeing any other hands. I think we can move forward. We just have post-consumer recycled content verification and reuse and refill. And then we go to the public comment. So, Pete, PCR content.
Yep. I want to bring this item up early. This is an area we have less work that's being completed. It wasn't part of the needs assessment as we moved that piece forward because it wasn't a requirement. But the legislation requires the program plan to set targets for minimum post-consumer recycled content rates for certain materials or certain types of covered materials, plastic, glass, paper, metal, that will strive to meet by January 1st, 2030 and January 1st, 2035. So just so it's clear, post-consumer recycled content is the amount of post-consumer recycled materials used in the production of covered materials in a calendar year over the amount of covered materials used for products sold or distributed by producers within or into the US market in the same calendar year. And I want to be explicit that post-consumer recycled material means only those covered materials that have served their intended end use as a consumer item and that have been separated or diverted from the waste stream for those purposes. So we cannot count as part of this. If you think about metal going into a mill, we couldn't include a steel beam potentially that's getting recycled. We would only be able to include in those numbers steel cans that were used for consumer products. So just want to be absolutely clear on that side as to what this requirement means. And so there are potentially, as we start to think about that, some potentially differences when we talk about some of the different material categories from paper to glass to metal to plastic. Next slide over.
Right, you have a question from Scott? Another Scott? Scott Saunders?
I have one quick question, not necessarily about the definition, but as we're recommending post-consumer recycled content inclusion rates, you know, we all want to be aspirational and have a high rate, but to keep the markets from being disruptive, the rate that we ask companies to put back in their product really shouldn't be more than what is collected in the state. So if we set a high rate, but for argument's sake, our collection rate's 13%, but we set a rate of inclusion of 30%, we create market disruptions and can spike pricing. So I think we need to have some type of a ramp up so that, you know, as collection improves, so does the requirement for the inclusion of that material. Just that comment.
Super helpful, Scott. Scott? Scott?
Second, Scott to 5 glass packaging. I'm going to second what Scott Saunders said. I think you're going to see a lot of variability here, and I question, well, every material is different. The material coming from other places is going to be hardly affected by the program in Colorado. So,
maybe
a lot more. I'm saving a lot of more discussion for this particular item than the recovery and the recycling rates.
So maybe if we move to the next slide, I think we are definitely looking for feedback, early feedback on this as we move it forward. So is there advice that you would provide? Are there resources that we should be looking at specifically around the different materials that we're talking about around rates of how they should be set? We also have some categories where it may be difficult. If we were to include wood and have a post-consumer recycled content rate for wood packaging, there may be some difficulties in tracking that side. So, you know, should the rates be applied to other materials other than plastic, paper, metal, and glass? We are looking CAA right now at this requirement is in some of the other states. So we are looking at a harmonized approach for recycled content tracking and verification. But again, we want to make sure that we are thinking through where potentially we don't want to be setting undue burden on companies as they move this forward. So we don't want to act in a way that may actually hinder activities from happening in the first place. And then we also want to think about what types and approach should be taken with exemptions and waivers. So there are certain materials potentially that don't require or that have limitations, health and safety limitations around the amount of recycled content that they can use. And so we certainly want to make sure that we consider that type of stuff. There can be impacts in the marketplace when there are issues around availability of certain types of materials. And so we want to make sure we get feedback from all of you about how potentially we should approach exemptions and waivers. And I'll stop there. And I think I see Chris with his hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Peter. Chris Howes, Colorado Retail Council. Thank you for the presentation. In response to your question about a harmonized approach, our members would endorse that. We operate across states, so to the extent that we can have one system that all of our stores operating in California and Colorado and Maine and et cetera, could abide by, we would appreciate that, so that we don't have different programs in different states. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Clinton?
Yeah, Clinton Sander, A1 Organics. I just kind of want to pose a statement to like what we're talking about right here and how this relates to certified compostables and making sure that they get to an effective processing and used or completely, turned into a soil amendment versus being sorted out and thrown away due to the contamination that came with them. So I'm just wondering, have we thought through, since we have to make sure that their processing of covered materials, defining the processing requirements for certified compostables so that, again, they're not just being thrown away through depackaging or those type of mechanisms. Is that why they're not, is that why they're not on the, that's why they're not listed out here? I'm just wondering, where does that fall into this?
So the question is, and I don't know this well enough myself, Clinton, would be, I assume potentially paper compostable, certified compostable products potentially could include recycled content as part of them. I do not know around plastic compostables because of the types of materials that they would be made of. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that they would necessarily
Go
be
back
able
up.
to include recycled content because they're going to be composted. So, I mean, my sense would be potentially that might be an area where we would say, does it make any sense to have recycled content requirements associated with certified compostable products, given the fact that you're breaking them down into a compost amendment as part of the process.
Yes. Okay, maybe I misunderstood your post-consumer recycled content verification because I was putting that also towards on that
So this
second
is the
slide.
verification. This is to say, you're saying that you've put, let's say, 40% post-consumer recycled content into your product. We need to make sure that we've got a means to say, is that true? So the pro will need to make sure that it's monitoring whether producers are achieving the rates that they're reporting on as part of their the data they would supply to the pro.
Gotcha. Yeah, sorry. I understand that. My question was more on making sure that the material was processed or recycled correctly. And I thought we had talked about that a little bit after those other questions, and I was just kind of reinforcing, making sure that that's truly happening at the end market level.
Yeah. So I think your comment fits to something we are going to deal with in future meetings as well, which is ensuring that we're measuring contamination rates both at MRFs and compost facilities. So I think that fits with that conversation to some extent around how we're measuring those, and again, whether that's other covered materials that are the contamination, I guess, potentially, or whether some of those certified compostables potentially are some of the contamination as well.
Yeah. Well, and also, Peter, it fits into the bigger conversation that you guys were just having about end markets. And if the material is actually going to an end market for purchase or for use, that's based on the recycling rate. If we can't sell the finished compost and it's not going to an end market that includes compostables, then it's just going to sit still. And it's the same scenario within our industry, the same conversation. And I thought it was really interesting that you guys are bringing that up because that's the same for us. If we can't sell our material, it's not going to make it.
Yeah, and those are pieces that we will want to, I think, ensuring that we're covering as part of the program plan, because at the end of the day, we want to instill public confidence in the program. And if materials are not being managed and not processed, and it cannot be proved that they're managed, we're not going to achieve that public confidence level.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands up now. I think we're ready to go to our last item, which is reuse and refill.
Yeah. And I just say on these two last items, certainly I think, we're early in the process right now. So these are questions I think you can take back and think through, and we would love to get additional feedback as we start to write the program plan. For reuse and refill, we have to propose an approach to measure and report on the use of reusable and refillable covered materials and establish goals and strategies for increasing the use of those reusable and refillable covered materials. So we are looking at an approach as well. So this fits with what we had talked about earlier around more of a harmonized approach across jurisdictions. So we do have requirements in other states right now around measurement of these products across jurisdictions. So we're currently in the process right now of looking at that. We can just move to the next slide. There are some potential gaps. So I want to talk just briefly about reuse and refill. So it means the return into the marketplace of a covered material that is already being used in the same manner as originally intended without a change to the covered material's purpose, was intended to be used for its original purpose at least 5 times. So there are questions I think I have as to, is this definition, is there any additional clarification that needs to be added to this definition? Should there be any exclusions for certain types of reusable materials? So when we talk about reusable materials, we can think about lots of different ways that we use them in our homes. We've got, I guess some people may have still the sort of water towers that are part of the house and a big reusable water container that might be associated with it. You've got propane cylinders that people are using for their barbecues that would be reused on a regular basis. But there are lots of other materials we use too. We buy coffee cups from cafes that we potentially reuse multiple times. So it would be helpful for us to get advice back from you as, is there any additional parameters we need to add around how we define those? And then also, how should CAA measure activities associated with reuse and refill for producers that may be simply exempted? So, there is certainly an exemption in place already for under 5 million in gross revenue or less than 1 ton of covered material. So there are companies that will definitely potentially fit under that category. Using the example of water tower, companies that provide the large reusable water bottles, many of those companies might fit under that 1 ton of covered material exemption. So I guess there's a question of, are there potential ways that we should be looking at to capture those activities that are happening within the marketplace and that we measure moving forward if potentially they're not necessarily caught under the definition of producer in the legislation. So again, I think this is an early sort of flag that, as we look this one through as to how we're going to make sure that this is effective, there are some flags from our side that there might be some gaps, and looking for early advice as to potentially how we might cover some of those gaps from this group.
So if you wake up in the middle of the night and you have an idea, and it's related to this, that the CAA and Pete would be very happy to get that information. Again, you're all pioneers. You're moving forward on this. You're going to be learning all along. So, okay, before we move on, Scott, you have a question?
Scott, yeah.
I accidentally put something in the chat that I meant for the public. The Scott to Five Glass Packaging, I put something in the chat that I meant for the entire. Each of these last 2 topics are very complicated and much more complicated than I think the law anticipated, and we may need to devote an entire session to each one of them. People may not quite understand what I'm about to, what we're getting into with these last 2 topics, but it's a bit more complicated and material specific than I think people anticipated when they wrote the law.
So Scott, I think that's really helpful feedback in the sense of, as we move forward, if you've got suggestions around how to cover some of these products, we would certainly be very open to that. I think, part of part of the push today was to really flag them to start to say, hey, look, we know that these are going to be areas that are complicated. And so early feedback like that is super helpful.
So Scott mentioned these two. Clinton also mentioned, the compostable packaging. If there are other items that you feel, really deserve that kind of full-on look, just, communicate that. As Pete's saying, it's very important. All right. If there are no more questions at this point, Amanda, do we move right into the public comment period, public input period?
Yes, Scott, we would. We received interest from 5 of the attendees from the general public today. So we are now in the public comment period of the meeting. We will call on members of the public in the order in which their requests were received. And since we have limited time, we will allow 2 minutes to each comment. We encourage commenters to focus on topics discussed in this meeting. And we will start first with Rachel Setsky of EcoCycle. Rachel, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
I have. Can you hear me?
We can. Your time begins now.
Thank you. I'm Rachel Setsky with EcoCycle. We are a nonprofit recycler, and we operate the Boulder County Recycling Center in Boulder County. I want to thank all of you again for all the amazing work you've been doing. This is a lot to get done in a short time. Particularly wanted to focus my comments on the materials recyclables list. And really thank you for some of the updates since the draft was circulated in, was that January? Really appreciate some of those changes. Wanted to talk again about wrapping paper. It's a particularly problematic material for our MRF. A number of reasons for that. Wrapping paper is frequently contaminated with tape. It's often a low-grade paper that a lot of our markets don't want. Most of our markets don't want. And it's also really hard to educate consumers about which wrapping paper is acceptable, what a non-metallicized wrapping paper is. That's not something your average consumer understands. And so we would really love to see that come off of that list. And to the comments earlier, our MRF also has problems with aerosols, and we do have markets for thermoforms, and Mark or anyone else would be happy to connect with you and talk more about any of those materials. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Appreciate your comments. We're next going to move to Mark Thompson of Phoenix Recycling. Mark, you should now be able to unmute.
I was able to unmute. Thank you.
Your time begins.
Mark Thompson, Phoenix Recycling. We're in Southwest Colorado in La Plata County. I have some questions and concerns. Oh, we are a hauler and a MRF operator. I'll focus my comments on the MRF portion. As I kind of envision this whole process, I sort of envision an hourglass. And we've talked a lot about what goes into the hourglass, who pays for it, who's regulating it. We touched briefly today on minimum recycled content, which is kind of what's coming out the bottom. And in the middle of all this, we have MRF operators. And it seems to me like that's a really essential part of this whole problem that we're trying to solve. And from a policy development perspective, it makes sense to keep pushing that part down the road because we need to understand what's going to be expected of the MRFs before we can ask them to do it. I wanted to sort of jump in and say, I think if we could include, like really reach out to MRF operators as soon as humanly possible and get them engaged. In my county, for instance, if I have a change of traffic that's significant, if I have to change the footprint of my building, if I have to do anything other than move bells and whistles around inside of my building, I have to get a permit. That's a 2-year process minimum. If it's something bigger than that, it could take even longer. And so we can't wait until all of the processes are fully developed and then present it to the MRFs and say, please help make this happen. We need to get MRFs involved early. And there's a list of every single MRF in Colorado on CDPHE's website. There's a lot of entities on that list that are not MRFs, but every MRF is on that list. And I would hope and encourage people to reach out to contact the MRFs and get them involved sooner rather than later. It's going to make this a lot easier. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark, for your comment. And we'll next move to Brian Loma, Cut the Plastic EMS. Brian, you are now able to unmute. Brian,
I am unmuted. Thank you.
All right, your time begins now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. I appreciate all of the hard work that you are doing in this very important process. I truly see and believe that standards that we set, we possibly establish a nationwide standard, as we've already in discussion. But I want to figure it out first. One of the things that I'm kind of stuck in the world of is the platinums, the flexible plastics that are really
Brian,
handle.
I'm just going to pause for a moment. The connection is making it incredibly difficult to hear you. Is it possible to come back to you? Are you able to reconnect or move to a location where you have more bars?
Does this work?
We can hear you. Why don't we continue?
Okay. So as I was saying, my concern is with the items that are on the hard, or maybe not even on the hard recycle list, the flexible plastics you guys have kind of touched on briefly. We have a really extensive infrastructure that exists currently through grocery stores where people can bring back their plastic bags and those hard films, soft films that are harder to recycle through the MRF units. I just want to encourage that as this process continues, that we're looking at the existing infrastructures and that we are also making sure that there are capacities for businesses to grow into these processes. Here in Denver, we have laws that say we're not supposed, that we're supposed to recycle our carpet, but there's nobody that takes carpet for recycling. And so, it's kind of a cart before the horse as far as the pricing and the costing goes. But for those of us who are trying to figure out how to start businesses to meet these needs, we're also sitting on our hands and knees, waiting to see how this process pans out. But I do want to encourage and want to see those films, if they're not going to be in the MRF because of the expensive costs for reformulating a MRF to handle that we're considering the existing infrastructures and putting some pressure to expand that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for your comment. All right, we'll now move on to Gary Cohen, food packaging specialist, Supply One. Gary, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
I did. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good to see everyone. And I concur with Scott's comment before. You guys are definitely pioneers.
Can I just miss somebody walking in the building?
Go ahead, Gary. It sounds like.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Go ahead.
All
That
right,
was just some background noise from someone else. Go ahead.
So I apologize. So my question really, or comment really, goes to the material recycle list as the minimum recycle list. Scott, you were asking before about items that perhaps were not seen on it. And as a packaging specialist, and Scott Saunders can speak to this, most of the polypropylene that we see out in the field with yogurt and whatnot is injection molded. there's quite a bit of thermoformed polypropylene out in the market, and specifically what you see in the case ready and the meat trays today, that's all polypropylene thermoformed. Many of the ready to eat meats that you'll get, or meals that you'll get served, are also in many cases polypropylene. So my question or my comment would be to include perhaps thermoformed polypropylene, and not just, and perhaps divide it up, because PET is obviously divided up into thermoformed and injection molded. Perhaps the same type of classification needs to be addressed with polypropylene. And again, I'll defer to Scott Saunders, the expert on this. So, and I appreciate the opportunity to make the comments.
Thanks, Gary. We are going to move next to Peter Beerbaum, One World Resource, LLC. Peter, you should now be able to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Peter Beerbaum, One World Resource, Colorado-based small business waste consultant. My comments are with regards to the discussion on producer registration and free riders. My understanding is that down the road, and I believe it's 2 years after implementation, the pro must provide a list of participating producers and a list of non-participating producers to the extent known. I would just encourage early posting of the list and requesting feedback from stakeholders, in particular other producers. This could help with identifying and addressing free riders, as well as assisting Circular Action Alliance with just developing a comprehensive list. Thanks, I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to all of those who gave public comment. We will compile the comments that we received and include them in the meeting summary. As a reminder, you can submit both written comments and questions by email to cdphe@eprcomments@state.co.us. I've put that email address in the chat again, and I'll turn it back over to Scott for the meeting summary and the next steps.
Great, thanks very much, Amanda. I want to thank Darla and Pete for their presentations today. I want to thank all of the board members for their questions and comments and insights. We're at that time of the meeting for a recap, talking about next steps briefly, and adjourning. So as a follow-up, as a recap here, we have noted the following few items. Staff will send a meeting notice for the June 13th meeting, as we were talking about earlier. That would start at 8:30 a.m. and end at 11:30 a.m. There's also the June 12th tour, topped off by a brewery tour and tasting. And then the staff will let the board know, and I can't see this because there you go. Let the board know as soon as we hear more from the Joint Budget Committee's next hearing date. So Amanda put in the chat a link here for the advisory board. And meeting materials will be posted on the department's webpage within the next few days. Amanda has posted the link in the chat. Please join us at our next scheduled advisory board meeting on May 8th of this year from 12:30 to 3:30 p.m. So members of the public, stakeholders, thank you for attending today. We, as always, value your participation and partnership and appreciate you've taken a lot of time out of your day to be part of this producer responsibility program development. We hope you will stay connected and share the details of this program with others. And I will close by thanking again the board. We are, as always, incredibly grateful for your input and greatly appreciate the time that you've put into researching these topics and providing your expertise and keen insights. So it's now time to adjourn, and I see we have two questions here from Peter and Liz. Okay, So I don't know who was first. I think I'm going to go with the advisory board chair first because no. So sorry that I waited here till I saw your hands, but Liz,
It's all
go
right.
first.
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. This is a very mundane point of clarification, but as we are doing the wrapping up next steps, I just wanted to make it clear. I wanted to comment that when we were on the slide that was covering the overview of the 2024 plan, in that slide where we were talking about when we'll be covering different topics, or a rough idea of when we're going to do that. That particular slide did not show the entire PDF. So I was hopeful that that is going to be a PDF that will be posted on the website. And to your point just now, Scott, of thanking everyone for their time, I certainly would like to give whatever tool we can to our audience, that if they are only interested in a particular topic, I think it is worthwhile to have that information available to them so that they don't have to attend every single meeting, but they could attend the ones that are specific plans to them, and giving access to our interested audience in what the plan looks like, when we think we'll be covering those different topics, I think would be useful information. And so it's probably pedantic. The CDPHE staff is already planning on posting that. I just wanted to call it out.
Thank you. That's an important observation. And Pete, will this be on, and I know this would be for Darla or Wolf as well, but will this be up on the CDPHE webpage, or will there be modifications made to this before it goes up? Because I think that's an important comment that Liz made for people to time when they want to participate.
I can't answer what's going to be on CDPHE's website, but I think we can work to make sure that we're providing notice ahead of time as to the items that are going to be covered. There will be flux in that hard to plan out exactly what's going to happen 8 months from now or 6 months from now. So we may have adjustments to that list as we move forward. But I think we can make sure that we're telling people ahead of time as to what those items will be. If I can just really quickly, I know we've had lots of comments. I would say on MRF operators, absolutely. We will look to set up a separate conversation with MRF operators. So appreciate the comments from Mark, Rachel. I think the comments around gift wrap, I understand the issue. I guess my question is, do we want to be denying materials that can be recycled from into the system? So that would be helpful to get some additional feedback on. And certainly appreciate the other comments around producer listing producers and around thermoforms for PP. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure we were acknowledging those comments, and certainly those people can feel free to reach out to us as the program plan consultation moves forward.
Great, thank you, Pete. And Darla, you have a comment?
Yep, thanks, Scott. I just wanted to respond to Liz's question about the draft schedule of topics being posted on the website, and let everyone know that because it's an internal working draft document, we will not be posting it on the website, but instead what we will do is post the agenda. That is our practice, to post the agenda in advance of each advisory board meeting, and that's typically 1 week in advance of the meeting, so attendees can see what's coming for that month and decide if they want to attend.
Okay, thank you, Darla.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that may be it. So let me ask if I can get a motion to adjourn. Oh, is everyone all like tuckered out? Come on, we got,
Clinton
go ahead, Clint.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. There's the compost man. All right.
Yeah, let's do it. Clinton
Let's
Sander,
do it.
A1
All right. Do I hear it?
Organics. I motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Mitchell,
All right.
City of Fort Collins, I'll second.
Thank you, Caroline. Any opposed? All right. Unanimously, we're going to adjourn at 3:04 p.m. So thanks very much, everyone. Great meeting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.